Thousands of public servants began a one-day strike in South Africa on Thursday over wage demands. Professional organizations said the strike is led by one of South Africa's largest public service unions, the Public Servants Association, as PSA, which has about 235,000 members. The dispute over public servant salaries intensified after Labour Ministry last week announced a 3% increase in salaries, and that's lower than the 6.5% the unions were asking for. For more insights and details on this and analysis, practice leader Sub-Saharan Africa Frontier View Matt Kindiger joins me to discuss this. Hi, Matt. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me on the show today.
And now, do you expect, Matt, that the government is going to make concessions to end this strike that started? I do know they didn't strike today because of the weather, but what do you think the government's going to do?
Well, so first of all, I would expect there to be further strike action, probably by public sector workers in South Africa because of the wage offer. And in short, yes, I would expect the government to make concessions to raise the wage offer for public sector workers in South Africa. And this is for a number of reasons. The first is that, in our view, the 3% initially offered was probably an opening gambit by the government in an attempt to, pitch its initial offer very low in anticipation of quite tough negotiations with public sector trade unions. So certainly, we think it's come in very low at the start, and it's probably going to work its way up through a process of negotiation. The other couple of things include the government has actually severely restricted public sector hiring over the last couple of years. And this means that because the number of civil servants in total is not growing as quickly, it does have some fiscal scope to raise the amount it pays these civil servants. So there is a bit of wiggle room there. And additionally, we would expect the government to try to keep the trade unions on its side politically. Trade unions, especially public sector trade unions, wield a lot of political influence and power in South Africa, and the government would be we expect it to be very careful to keep them on their side ahead of the 2024 general election. So certainly we expect there to be some back and forth, but there will most likely be some increase in civil service wages offered by the government.
Okay, but we do know that the government recently presented a midterm budget. But what does this strike, what does this say about the state of public finances in South Africa?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things we can take away from the strike in terms of the impact or what it tells us about public finances in South Africa. The first is that the fact that the government offered a very low initial wage increase, only 3%, does suggest that this is quite unprecedented, especially compared to recent wage increases over the last decade or so. And this shows that the government is facing fiscal pressure to cut spending and reduce the deficit. We must remember that the government has a fairly tight deadline to achieve a primary budget surplus, so that's its budget balance before interest payments by the middle of this decade. So it really is under quite a lot of pressure to cut civil service wages. However, what we have seen in South Africa over the last year or so is quite strong revenues from commodity exports, mining production, financial services as well. So the fact that we do expect to see some concessions made by the government does reflect that it does have a little bit of extra wiggle room from the perspective of redirecting some revenues towards civil service wages. But I would say the strike is not unprecedented, but it does reflect some additional pressure that the government is facing to cut its budget deficit over the next couple of years to maintain fiscal credibility amongst investors in particular.
So speaking of tight public finances, how will this affect South Africa's growth outlook over the coming years, Matt?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting because the government is probably going to increase spending and investment below inflation over the next couple of years. We're probably going to see real terms cuts in government spending and investments through 2023, 2024, maybe 2025. And this will take quite a significant driver of growth out of the economy, especially, again, from a civil service wage perspective. Very strong civil service wage increases have been a major driver of consumer spending in South Africa over the last 10 to 15 years, and this is going to slow quite considerably. So we are going to see a sort of weaker sentiment amongst middle-income households, and this will affect the retail industry, for example. We are also going to see a bit of a slowdown in investment by state-owned enterprises and in infrastructure, although the government wants to prioritize investment into road and rail infrastructure and also improving the performance of ESCOM. The government will not have as many resources or be able to spend as much as it would like. So certainly from a government spending and an investment perspective, we do expect there to be a bit of a negative impact on growth. But that said, the fact that the government is taking its fiscal deficit and its debt very seriously, and it wants to balance its books by the next couple of years, does mean that investors will view South Africa more favorably and view it as a little bit less risky. So this does support private sector investor sentiment towards the country to an extent. So a bit of a mixed picture, but on balance, we would say that muted public finances not great for the growth outlook.
I know, Matt, you'll be tracking that. Your organization will be doing that front. We'll be keeping that in check and also keeping us updated. Thanks, Matt Kindiga, Practice Leader, Sub-Saharan Africa Frontier View, for joining us on the program.
Thanks very much.